Hey, Smart News. Today we're going to be talking about a history-making story, a historic moment that doesn't seem to be getting the attention that meets the headline. And I'll explain in a moment. Happy Monday. I feel like this sums up the start of the week, but this is a really key story, and we're going to be talking about what's happening at the U.S. southern border. It's where we left off on Friday. I want to explain a little bit about how this story was rolled out and why it really matters, why it's really important, why it's worthy of the time, and the historic headline that is accurate. So let's talk a little bit about why any story around the U.S. southern border matters. By the way, what we call the southern border, U.S. Customs and Border Protection calls the southwest border. So you might see that distinction. Just always nice to learn a little something. So we're going to be talking about the southern border. Anything around the border really matters because there are so many different threads to that story. If you are concerned about national security, there's a thread you can pull on. You're concerned about the economy, the way taxpayer money is being spent, there's a thread you can pull on. A lot of our money is going to policies surrounding what's happening at the U.S. border and the evolution of what's happening there. You want to talk about politics? There's certainly a thread that we can pull on there as well. Politically, the story has wide-ranging ramifications. Whether or not you're a fan of former President Trump or not a fan of him, it could be argued that the issue around the U.S. southern border was one of the ways that he was able to galvanize support that led him to victory in the 2016 election. So the border has a way of really impacting politics in America. You care about children? You want to talk about children and child trafficking? We got to talk about the U.S. southern border. You want to talk about drugs and crime? We got to talk about the U.S. southern border too. You want to talk about humanitarian crisis? We have to talk about the U.S. southern border. So you can see why I think this story as a journalist is critical, because there's so many different sides to it. It's like a Rubik's Cube that you can keep on turning, and you're going to find out something new and different that can have ripple effects in a lot of different areas. So before I jump into the actual numbers, I also want to set some ground rules. And if you're new to Smarter News, you may not have heard this. If you are not new to Smarter News, I apologize because you've heard this a lot. But words really matter, right? Words really matter in the news. And this is a story where the word choice can often give a partisan perspective just in the first sentence. So when we're talking about people at the U.S. southern border, there's a lot of people that have come across U.S. southern border. There's a lot of different terms that are used. Undocumented alien, illegal immigrant, undocumented worker, migrants. I'm sure you guys have a few more that you can add, right? And depending on your political persuasion, again, one term could be used more than the other. As a journalist, I struggle with any of those terms because either they're limiting in a way that is not accurate or they're partisan. And I don't want to be any of that. So when we talk about people at the U.S. southern border, we call them people. There are good people and there are bad people. And there are some people we don't really know if they're good or bad. In that way, they're exactly like us. So while I'm going to be talking a lot about policy and data, I don't want to lose the fact that we're talking about people coming across the U.S. southern border and the people that are already here in the United States. So we have to just make sure that we keep the humanity to this conversation. So let's talk about what we learned on Friday and why it's so critical. So on Friday, late in the day, we get a release from the U.S. government about a snapshot of September. The September numbers at the U.S. southern border are important because it gives us an idea of what happened last month, but it also completes the government's fiscal year. So now we have a year worth of data, and that's when we really are going to know how historic was this year really. So late in the day of Friday, this is released. This is the oldest trick in the book. It's not unique to Democrat administrations or Republican administrations. Anyone that doesn't want a story to get a lot of attention is going to release it late on Friday, because if we release it late on Friday, everybody's off doing their own thing. And maybe, just maybe, by Monday morning, people kind of forget about this headline, which seems to be the case, by the way. It seems to have worked very, very effectively, because not seeing a lot of coverage as we move into a new week, despite the historic nature. So why do I keep saying it's historic? It's historic because it's the highest number of border encounters we've seen ever in U.S. history. So more than 1.7 million people were encountered at the U.S. southern border. We use the term encountered that's unique to the Biden administration, but in a lot of ways that allows us to use an umbrella term, because if you are encountered at the U.S. southern border by Border Patrol, you may be arrested or detained, you may be expelled, you may be allowed to apply for asylum or pursue asylum in America, you may be taken into government custody because you're a minor. So it's anyone that's encountered by Border Patrol. What's key about that is that these are the numbers that we know. Right? These are the numbers that we know based on Border Patrol. This is not the total number overall, because we know that there are some people that come across the border that are never detected. We don't know exactly who they are, so I think that's really important to know. But the sheer size really matters here because it's so big. This is the largest number we've seen in modern data collection going back at least 2 decades. But according to even records further than that, this seems to be one of the most historic numbers, if not the most historic number ever in the U.S. government history, as far back as we can recall. So that's critical. The size of the number is really important. The other thing I want you to know is that the increases at the U.S. southern border began really of October of last year. And I'm going to bring that full circle in just a moment. So what's important to know, though, with that headline is that although it's a historic number, that doesn't mean 1.7 million people were allowed to stay in America. In fact, there's a pandemic era policy that is allowing almost instant expulsion. So someone's not even going through necessarily a processing. They're able to be expelled right away. And if you look back over the last several months, which I did this morning, it's just under 50% or just over 50% more or less that are expelled any given month. So in September, 190,000 plus people were encountered at the U.S. southern border. The majority of them were expelled. But with such a high number, that still means a lot of people were able to stay. And when we're talking about who's able to stay, we're often talking about asylum seekers. So someone that is saying that I'm appealing to the U.S. for asylum. That's something very unique you can do once you cross over to U.S. territory. The minute I'm in the United States, let's say I fly here from China, and I'm saying I might be I'm being persecuted in China. I can appeal for asylum once I'm in America. So when someone crosses the border, even if they do so illegally, they step across the border and they say, actually, I'm here to apply for asylum. Their legal status is different than someone that's arrested or detained for just crossing the border illegally. And that's really important to know. They're an asylum seeker. Nuance is important in this conversation, but I just want you to know that's why we use the term asylum seeker rather than, let's say, illegal immigrant. So those are a couple things to know. Sheer size, 1.7 million plus people encountered at the U.S. southern border over the last fiscal year. A large amount of them have been expelled, but a large amount of them have been able to stay. Not only asylum seekers, but often family units and unaccompanied minors, those 17 and younger. In fact, in September, if we compare September's numbers of unaccompanied minors to the previous historic year, which was in 2019, it's a 300% increase. So it's a much higher number of unaccompanied minors compared to the last historic year. I want to show you this data really quick. The blue line is what we saw this year. The red line is 2020. It's not a great comparison because we shut down the border for the part of the pandemic. And then the orange line is 2019 during the Trump administration. So I just want you to see that. So this is key. September's numbers showed a little bit of a decline compared to previous months, but you're still at an extremely historic pace. And that's really critical to know. So the pace matters. The trend is continuing to be high. Yes, that trend began in October during the final months of the Trump administration, but the trend has accelerated through the Biden administrations to monthly numbers that we haven't seen in decades, and now a final fiscal year that is a record-setting year. So here's where I want to leave you. What's really interesting about this point in time in this story is that we have seen 2 really interesting examples of American leadership on this issue in recent years. During the Trump administration, they took a firmer stance, if you will, right on borders. So we're going to build a wall and we're going to deter you in any way from coming in multiple ways. In fact, we're going to arrest you if you cross the border. We don't care if you're applying for asylum. That was challenged in court. That policy had changed, but that was their stance. The Biden administration has a different stance, right? It's that we're not going to build that border wall. No. And actually, we're going to kind of fine tune what our policy is at the border. And quite frankly, the news cycle has been distracted by a lot of other things. So, but you're seeing very different postures by the administration, right? Different postures, different examples of American leadership. So I'll leave you with this question, which is, if we're seeing very different styles and we're not seeing a trend subside, you're still seeing a lot of people come to the US southern border and attempt to cross it illegally for any number of reasons. What changes this? And where are the new ideas? Both administrations have had majorities of their parties. So during the Trump administration, they had a majority in the Senate and in the House. The Biden administration has a Democrat majority in the Senate and the House. They want to do something on immigration, and the border would be a part of it. They could do it. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing movement of any kind. So where are the new ideas? Where are the new ideas, right? If you're able to Amazon yourself a roll of toilet paper by this evening, if we're able to send people to the edge of space, if we're able to do some of the remarkable things that we've covered here on Smarter News, then not figuring out the border seems more like a choice, doesn't it? And what I'm going to push for in my reporting is, where are the new ideas? What changes this? Because even on just a very basic human level, looking back on all those different threads, economic, social, political, national security, take any one number of those, there's a reason why this story deserves attention. And so it's not good for anybody to have this situation at the southern border. It's not good for anybody. So what changes it? What changes it? What do you think changes it? I'll be curious to hear from you. Tag your lawmaker. Let's find out. Maybe there's new ideas that we don't know about. But what changes this trend? We saw a history-making year this last year. We're now going to be turning the page to another new fiscal year, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's changing the trend of the increased number of people coming to the U.S. southern border being encountered there, including family units, including unaccompanied minors. This is an important story. So that's why I wanted to focus on it today. Curious your thoughts on this. Thanks for giving me a little bit of time to kind of go deep on it. I think it's really important. I probably have said the word important 25. It could be a drinking game. Everyone get your cup of coffee. When I say important, I know I overuse that term. I apologize, but I think it fits. All right, guys, we'll be covering this. I'm going to have a card stack on it later today. We have a host of other stories that we're working on this week, but I thought this deserves your attention, and I don't care if it's released late on a Friday. We're not going to get distracted. All right, have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.